Throughout my career as a blockchain engineer, I've had a lot of different people tell me that crypto is kind of like the wild, wild west, where you can get away with whatever and you have to watch out for all these scams and people trying to screw you over. Thankfully, that's not as true as it was anymore. The industry is getting more regulated and things are becoming more normal and sane and trustworthy. But at the end of the day, you're still gonna have to deal with the good, the bad, and the ugly, just like you would in the real wild, wild west. Today, we're gonna be talking about a protocol that holds a special place in my heart called NAVI protocol. NAVI is the biggest lending platform on Sui, and for those of you who don't know what a lending platform, basically it's a way of, what a lending platform does is you deposit a certain amount of tokens, like for example USDC, and then you get a certain amount of stable yield. So with USDC, it'd probably be like 2 to 3%, something kind of low. And then you're able, because you have that amount of USDC or that amount of tokens collateralized, then you can borrow against those tokens. So you could borrow, for example, a certain amount of Bitcoin or wrapped Bitcoin. And then in order to get your USDC back, you would have to then repay the loan with that wrapped Bitcoin. So it's basically, you can kind of think of it like a DEX, except it's not really a DEX. You're putting up collateral and then taking out loans on that collateral. The reason I was talking about the West earlier is because NAVI has had to deal with a lot of the good, the bad, the ugly, and we're going to talk about their engineering solutions to try to fix that. So first, we're going to be starting off with the good, which is flash loans. Flash loans are a really innovative part of DeFi. I think they're what makes DeFi really unique and worthwhile. We're then going to move to the bad, which is like scam coins and bad assets. And finally, we're going to talk about the ugly, which is Scamwicks, and specifically the Oracle solution that NAVI has implemented in order to combat this. So first, a little bit about myself. My name is Matthew Jurinka. I run a software development agency called Jurinka Software, and we specialize in Sui projects in the Move programming language, which is why that we're talking about a Sui protocol today. We do all kinds of things from mobile apps to perp stacks, and I'll include my website in the description if you want to check us out. I should also note, for the sake of intellectual honesty, that NAVI, at the time of recording this video, doesn't know that I'm making this video. They're not paying me, as of yet. And I don't have any financial interest in NAVI, although I definitely do want them to succeed. I've met them in person. I think they're, as reputable as anybody else in the space, and it probably would be a good thing for my business if they were to, continue to succeed and prosper. But enough yapping about myself. Let's get into the meat of things. So first, let's talk about flash loans. And flash loans, I think, are one of the things that are the most innovative things in DeFi. And if you're a developer, if you're an engineer, you really need to understand these because it's something that you may very well want to integrate into a future product. So first, let's take a step back to understand why flash loans are important in DeFi. Let's take a look at how things work in traditional finance. So let's say, for example, I'm an arbitrager, right? I found some example of some profitable trade that takes me from dollars to yen to, Mexican pesos and then back into dollars somehow, whatever. So in order to actually take advantage of that trade, I need to have, some amount of money to, fund that, first go to US dollars, then to go to pesos. Well, you need to have US dollars to start with, but then you go to yen, then you go to pesos, then back into dollars. But throughout that whole thing, you need to have the initial amount of capital to take advantage of that opportunity that you've just found, right? You need to have the technical ability, the intellectual ability to find the trade in the first place, and also the financial means to take advantage of that trade. With DeFi, you already have, because of the way that flash loans work and because of this innovation, the only thing that you need is that technical experience and the infrastructure to find the trade because the flash loans are what's going to be providing the capital. So what flash loans are is they're like the flash loan, the flash and flash loan, what that comes from is that the loan happens within one single block. So in Ethereum case, probably most developers doing this are already familiar with Ethereum. The way it would work in Ethereum is that you would go to some protocol like Aave that has a big pool of money just sitting there. And what you would do is you would tell Aave, you would give it a callback function. And basically what Aave would do is it would call that callback function with the amount of money, and then that callback could be whatever kind of code that you provide. So in this case, it would be an arbitrager, but actually it could be pretty much anything. And then at the end of that callback function, you as a developer are responsible for paying the initial amount of money that you sent back into Aave. And so this way you have access to the entirety of Aave's funds. And the reason why it's secure is because, again, the power of blockchain, this is all atomic. What the Aave is responsible for, whatever a flash loan provider whenever they integrate these systems, they need to ensure, and they do ensure, that if they lend you money, that you are responsible for giving it back, and that there's no way for you to like game it somehow by doing whatever, putting in an account. You need to, what the flash loan ensures is that whenever Aave sends out money, they receive that money, and that's why it's safe to do this. And actually, it's not only is it safe to do it, it's insanely cheap. So on Aave, I think it's insanely low cost. NAVI has basically the same implementation, except they do it a little bit differently in Move because there's no callbacks. But specifically on NAVI, which has this kind of flash loans mechanism, the percentage is, I think right now it's 0.06% as a fee every time you want to do a flash loan on the amount of money that you're taking with that flash loan. But they are going to, I believe in their docs, they say that they're going to move it up to 0.2%. So they expect that to increase in the future. But 0.2% on a flash loan is like insanely low when you consider the fact that on some of these protocols like Aave, I think you can do up to like hundreds of millions of dollars. NAVI does put a limit. They put a limit per asset. So for example, I think you can only do like 10 million SWI, for example. That number might be wrong, but like there's some some number of millions of dollars worth of tokens that you can do. Whereas with other protocols, they might let you do whatever. But ultimately, I think this is really important for any kind of DeFi protocol that holds a large sum of money to integrate. I think this is a really low barrier to entry feature. And if you at home, if you're thinking about building some kind of DeFi protocol that has a substantial amount of money, you might want to think about including flash loans. Because again, even though that 0.2% may feel small and insignificant, over time and over a large amount of transaction volume, that's really going to add up, and it's going to be another good way of adding protocol revenue for your users. And also keep in mind that there's really no risk to this because that invariant is maintained where at every single transaction, the amount of money that is returned has to be equal to or greater than the amount of money that you put in. You're not actually putting your protocol, the funds of your protocol at risk, right? This is basically just a risk-free way of making money. And also from a perspective of, let's say I'm building an ETF, it's really useful to be able to rely on arbitrageurs, right? In the traditional finance world, it's not, again, there's these kind of barriers to entry for arbitrage. So just because you make some kind of financial product that relies on arbitrage to keep its price marked, that doesn't actually mean that somebody will go ahead and arbitrage that in practice. But in DeFi, because the barriers of entry are much lower because of flash loans, it really just makes it easier to design, financial products like ETFs, for example, that rely on arbitrage, to keep that kind of price mark going. So now that we've just been talking about the good, let's go on and talk about the bad assets and the scam assets that unfortunately have been known to plague DeFi or certain protocols on DeFi for years and years and years. So part of the way that NAVI works, right? Again, remember the whole core principle of NAVI is that it's a lending protocol, right? Like you put in a certain amount of assets and then you are able to borrow a certain amount of other assets depending on the value of the collateral. But what happens if you can, artificially change the value of that collateral? Well, we're going to talk about two ways of doing this, but the first way of doing that is with, actually manipulating the amount of token that there exists. So one thing in DeFi is that, you need to be really careful about if you're trying to integrate some kind of coin, whether it's a meme coin, whether it's USDC, USDT, or, whatever, wrapped Bitcoin, you need to be really conscious of the way that supply is calculated and the way that the actual token works. So for example, if you think about Ethereum, there's all these examples of tokens with taxes where they transfer, if you try to transfer a token to somebody, it takes off 5% on that transfer. Or tokens where the creator can artificially inflate their own supply. They can just give themselves however amount of value that token that they want. Or also where the creator could say that this particular user, they just artificially take away balance from that user, right? And it's really hard to, like, a DeFi code is law. Like if you get screwed over, if something happens that's bad to you, like you really, unless the protocol defined a way for you to like rectify that, like it's not gonna happen. You can't go cry to the bank. You can't go tell this person, like, there's no like central authority that you can go to and be like, hey, I lost all my money, So you have to be really, really conscious of what's actually happening in the tokens. And going back to how this affects NAVI, like let's say for example, you had built some kind of alternate lending pool that allowed any kind of asset. Well, what happens if I, create my own asset that maybe initially you're kind of honest about it, you try to get users, you've built up some kind of value in this asset, and then eventually you rug pull, and then you mint yourself 1 million billion of these tokens, and then you could either go to a DEX and try to trade out that inflated asset to like a real asset like SUI, but there's only going to be a certain amount of liquidity in that pool. On NAVI, if you were, or like any Aave or any kind of lending protocol has this issue where if they accepted some asset that was bad, and they didn't set the risk limits properly, if they would be able to basically inflate the asset, they'd be able to supply an infinite amount or an arbitrary amount of that asset into NAVI, and then they'd be able to borrow like that real asset and then just kind of and then send it off to whatever SEX or whatever Tornado Cash, whatever mixer they have before anybody gets wise. So that's why it's really important when you're looking at lending protocols. You have to be aware, like because these things are cross-collateralized, you need to make sure that the platform that you were entrusting money to has only like kind of reputable assets, and that they have certain limits on what you can do with those assets. So NAVI, fortunately, they thought ahead about this, and they integrated a couple of features that kind of prevent against this. So for one, obviously, like it's permission. You can't just put any asset you want on up on Aave or on NAVI, excuse me. So that really does a lot to prevent like kind of scammers from doing the attack that I just mentioned. But at the end of the day, like again, this is the wild, wild west. We live in crypto. Like who the hell knows? Like Circle technically could mint an infinite amount of USDC. Tether could implement an infinite amount of USDC, right? You never know what's going to happen. So one of the things that they've done to prevent against this is add supply limits and debt ceiling. So for example, if you wanted to, like there's a certain value on USDC that you could possibly add to the protocol, and if it goes above that, the protocol just wouldn't let you deposit that amount. The other thing is with borrow limits, like the debt ceiling, is you can only borrow a certain percentage of they put limits on the amount that you can borrow of specific assets using another asset as collateral. So these two things combined, I think, are pretty effective against dealing with these kind of like scam tokens, like the rug pulls and the worst of the worst that we have in DeFi. So finally, let's get around to it, the ugly. Let's talk about Scamwicks. What are they? How do they impact lending protocols like NAVI, like Aave, and what do we do to combat them? Well, so first off, what is a Scamwick? Well, a Scamwick is basically a situation where you have some kind of protocol that relies on a particular price of an asset. So say, for example, we're building a kind of like fixed income vault where you deposit, like, let's say we deposit $1 million into the smart contract, and then every like month, for example, you'll get you pay $10,000 to some person. Now, unless, let's say the asset's in wrapped Bitcoin, right? Well, the asset that we have is in Bitcoin, but we want to pay out in dollars. So how do we do that conversion? Well, the naive way, like the simple way, the first thing you'd think of doing is you'd go to the biggest DEX on the platform and you try to see what is the current rate between wrapped Bitcoin and dollars that we need to use to convert, and figure out how much wrapped Bitcoin we're going to send this person so that it actually maps out to $10,000. The problem with that is that what happens if somebody tries to manipulate the price on the DEX right before that transaction is sent out that pays out that fixed income every month? And the way that would work is you would basically take a flash loan from some protocol. You would take out a flash loan of wrapped Bitcoin, for example. You would sell as much wrapped Bitcoin as you possibly can, and then that would really tank the price of wrapped Bitcoin. Such that when the protocol goes to do that calculation, it goes to the DEX, it sees, hey, the price of Bitcoin is this price, and then it tries to calculate the amount of Bitcoin that it has to send out such that that the person actually receives $10,000 worth of that Bitcoin. And because the price is so low, it's going to send out a lot of Bitcoin. The problem here is that, again, the price on the DEX doesn't necessarily match up to what the price of Bitcoin is in reality. And this is the problem that you have when you try to get the spot price. When you just go to some DEX or go to some protocol that does swapping and try to figure out just asking it naively, what is the value of this asset? It's vulnerable to those kind of flash loan, flash attacks like that, where you can dramatically pump down the value of the supply or the value of that particular token. So instead, what you have to do is you have to use something called an oracle. What an oracle is it's a service that's run by off-chain operators The two biggest ones on SWI, I believe, right now are Pith and Supra. And basically what Pith and Supra do is they maintain a big bunch of servers. They have a bunch of different partners. So they go to all these different DeFi teams that maintain servers that will go and then push updates to the chain based on what their kind of network believes that the price of Bitcoin or the price of SWI or the price of whatever is. So it's basically a way of getting off-chain data on-chain. And these oracles are not as vulnerable to this kind of like Scamwick problems and gaming the system as much as definitely going to a DEX is not secure. But if you just use Oracle, if you just use one particular Oracle, like for example Pith, or just using Supra, it's definitely great. Probably not going to run into this nearly as much, but there's still a possibility. So what NAVI does, what's really interesting, is that they take these different Oracle providers and they kind of combine them into one with specific rules of what kind of prices are valid. Like for example on NAVI, the prices have to be within a particular kind of range. So it's kind of aggregating all these different oracles into one particular price feed, so that this kind of attack where you try to mess with the data and try to artificially devalue the price of the Bitcoin or the price of whatever kind of asset you have, that's not going to work out. And one thing I should also note is that if we're actually designing some kind of fixed input or fixed income vault, it would not be an unreasonable design decision to, because again, we have this pattern where we have some kind of vault, we have some kind of smart contract that stores a large amount of money. I think in this situation, if that money is significantly large enough, it may make sense to implement a kind of flash loan system. Or it also might make sense to have the smart contract itself deposit that, the value, that kind of token in NAVI or in any kind of lending protocol, because then you just kind of earn, because these NAVI is considered to be very safe. Again, things happen, don't hold me, it's possible that something crazy might happen in the future. But these protocols, like Aave, for example, has a very long track record of not getting hacked. It's very safe, very secure, considered very, very safe, very secure by engineers. I would imagine Navi's only a few years old. It doesn't have that same kind of track record, but the move language is very secure. I would say, to the best that I can, it seems that Navi is pretty secure, pretty risk-free way of getting some assets, getting some return back on just that cash that you have, or any kind of token that you just have lying around. So hopefully by now we all should have a pretty good understanding of how NAVI provides value to arbitrageurs by implementing flash loans, how they use particular risk management tools to prevent random assets from blowing up and stealing everybody's money, and the kind of oracles that they use in order to prevent Scamwicks from doing the same and tricking the protocol into being able to give things away. I think we now have a pretty good understanding of the types of techniques that NAVI uses in order to keep their users safe, and how you should be thinking about how to integrate these things into your DeFi ecosystems or your protocols that you plan on making in the future. So again, my name is Matthew Jarinka. I hope this video was insightful in learning how these things work and how you can prevent these kinds of things happening in your future dApps, whether they're on SWI, whether they're on ETH, whether they're on whatever chain your heart desires. These concepts are pretty wide across the industry, not specific to any kind of particular chain. So again, thanks for watching, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your day.